The dust cloud rose behind Jack Morrison's horse as he rode into the small town of Sweetwater, Texas, on a scorching afternoon in July of 1878, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. He had been drifting from ranch to ranch for the past 3 years, ever since his father's spread in Colorado had been lost to debt and drought, and he had grown accustomed to the solitary life of a hired hand with no roots and no reason to settle. The town itself was nothing remarkable, just another collection of weathered buildings and false-fronted stores that lined a single dusty street, the kind of place where a man could earn a week's wages and move on without anyone remembering his name. But as Jack guided his mare toward the livery stable, something caught his attention that made him slow his pace and turn his head toward a small homestead at the edge of town. A woman knelt in what had once been a garden, her shoulders shaking with sobs that carried across the hot afternoon air. Jack pulled his horse to a stop and watched as she ran her hands through the brittle, blackened plants that littered the parched earth. Even from a distance, he could see the devastation before her. Every plant was dead, burned by the relentless sun and strangled by lack of water. The soil itself looked gray and lifeless, cracked into 1,000 pieces like broken pottery. Something in the raw grief of her posture struck Jack deeply, perhaps because he recognized the same helplessness he had felt watching his own family's land turn to dust, watching his father work himself into an early grave trying to save what could not be saved. He dismounted and tied his horse to a post near the property line, then removed his hat and approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. As he drew closer, he could see she was younger than he had first thought, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck, and a faded calico dress that had seen better days. Her hands were dirty from the soil, and tears had left clean streaks down her dusty cheeks. She did not look up when his shadow fell across the ruined garden, too lost in her grief to notice his presence. "Ma'am," Jack said quietly, his voice rough from days on the trail with no one to talk to but his horse. "I do not mean to intrude, but I could not help but notice your trouble here." The woman's head snapped up, and Jack found himself looking into the most striking green eyes he had ever seen. They were red-rimmed from crying, filled with a mixture of surprise and embarrassment at being caught in such a vulnerable moment. She scrambled to her feet, wiping at her face with the back of her hand and leaving more dirt streaks across her cheeks. "I apologize," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I did not realize anyone was watching. I must look a fool crying over a dead garden." "Not foolish at all," Jack replied, turning his hat in his hands. "A garden represents hope and hard work. Losing it is no small thing." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was sincere or simply making polite conversation. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her, because her rigid posture relaxed slightly, though fresh tears began to well in her eyes. "It was all I had," she whispered, gesturing to the devastation around her. "My husband died 6 months ago. Fever took him in the winter. He left me this house and a little bit of money, but not enough to live on. I thought if I could grow vegetables, I could sell them in town and maybe make enough to get by. But the well ran dry 3 weeks ago, and I have no money to dig a new one. I have been hauling water from the creek, but it is not enough. The heat killed everything." Jack looked at the ruined garden with a more critical eye, noting the layout and the type of plants she had attempted to grow. She had clearly known what she was doing. The garden had been well planned and carefully tended, but no amount of knowledge or effort could overcome a failed well and the brutal Texas summer. "What is your name, ma'am?" he asked. "Sarah," she replied. "Sarah Bennett, and you are Jack Morrison." "I am just passing through looking for work. I saw a notice at the livery that the Morrison Ranch was hiring hands for the season." Sarah nodded, wrapping her arms around herself despite the heat. "They are. Bill Patterson is a good man. He will give you fair wages if you are willing to work hard." Jack glanced at the dead garden again, then back at Sarah's face. He saw pride there, mixed with desperation, and it reminded him so much of his own mother in those final days before they lost everything. An idea was forming in his mind, reckless and impractical, but he could not shake it loose. "Miss Bennet," he said slowly, "I know this may sound strange, coming from a man you just met, but I would like to help you with this garden." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "Help me? I already told you I have no money to pay anyone." "I am not asking for money," Jack said quickly. "The truth is, I have been drifting for a long time and I am tired of it. I would like to settle somewhere, put down some roots. Maybe this is where I am meant to do that. The Patterson Ranch is not far from here. I could work there during the day and spend my evenings helping you fix this garden. The soil is not beyond saving, and there is still time to plant for next year if we start preparing now." Sarah stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Jack shrugged, uncomfortable with the intensity of her gaze. "Let us just say I know what it is like to lose everything and have no one offer a helping hand. Maybe I can be that hand for you." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing, and Jack was certain she would refuse his offer. But then her expression softened, and she nodded slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "If you truly mean it, I would be grateful for the help, but I insist on feeding you dinner each evening you work here. It is only fair." Jack smiled, the first genuine smile he had worn in months. "That sounds like a fine arrangement, Miss Bennet." "Sarah," she corrected, "if you are going to be spending your evenings in my garden, we should be on a first-name basis." "Sarah," Jack repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. "I will go secure that job at the Patterson Ranch and find a place to board. I can start helping you tomorrow evening if that suits you." Sarah nodded, and for the first time since he had approached her, a small smile touched her lips. It transformed her face, chasing away some of the grief and exhaustion, and Jack felt something shift in his chest. He told himself it was simply satisfaction at being able to help someone in need. But as he rode away from the small homestead toward the Patterson Ranch, he found his thoughts returning again and again to those striking green eyes and the strength he had seen in Sarah's face, despite her tears. The Patterson Ranch was a sprawling operation located about 4 miles west of Sweetwater, with hundreds of head of cattle and a dozen hands to manage them. Bill Patterson was indeed a fair man, as Sarah had promised, and he hired Jack on the spot after seeing how he handled a rope and sat a horse. The work was hard, starting before dawn and lasting until the sun hung low in the sky, but Jack had never shied away from honest labor. The other ranch hands were a rough but friendly bunch, and Jack found himself settling into the rhythm of the work more easily than he had expected. True to his word, Jack rode to Sarah's homestead that first evening with a shovel and pickaxe borrowed from the ranch. Sarah met him at the edge of the garden, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon, and her sleeves rolled up in preparation for work. The vulnerability he had seen in her the day before had been replaced by a determined set to her jaw, and Jack felt a surge of admiration for her resilience. "I have been thinking about the best approach," Sarah said without preamble. "The soil is dead, not just dry. We need to turn it over, get the dead roots out, and work in some new organic matter to bring it back to life." Jack nodded, impressed by her knowledge. "You know you're farming. Where did you learn?" "My father had a farm in Missouri," Sarah replied, leading him into the garden. "I grew up working the land. When I married Thomas and we moved to Texas, I thought I would continue that here, but the land is so different. The heat, the water scarcity. I underestimated how difficult it would be." They worked in companionable silence for the first hour, Jack using the pickaxe to break up the hard-packed earth while Sarah raked out the dead plants and roots. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and a slight breeze offered relief from the day's heat. As they worked, Jack found himself stealing glances at Sarah, noting the graceful way she moved and the furrow of concentration on her brow. She was beautiful, he realized, though it was not the delicate beauty celebrated in dime novels. Hers was a beauty forged by hardship, strong and enduring like the land itself. "Tell me about your husband," Jack said after a while, then immediately regretted the question when he saw pain flash across Sarah's face. "I apologize. That was too personal." "No," Sarah said, straightening and wiping sweat from her forehead. "It is all right. Thomas was a good man. We met in Missouri when I was 18. He was 22, working as a clerk in my father's bank. He had dreams of coming west and owning his own business. We married within 6 months and moved here the following spring. That was 3 years ago." "What kind of business did he have?" Jack asked, continuing to work the soil. "He opened a general store in town," Sarah replied. "It was doing well too. We were starting to make a real life here. But then the fever came last winter, and within a week, he was gone. I sold the store to pay for his burial and the debts he had accumulated getting the business started. This house and $100 was all I had left." Jack heard the tremor in her voice and understood the weight of what she had lost. Not just a husband, but a future, a purpose, a sense of security. The garden had been her attempt to rebuild, to find a way forward, and its failure had brought all that grief crashing back. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "That is a heavy burden to carry alone." Sarah met his eyes, and he saw gratitude there mixed with something else he could not quite identify. "Thank you. Not many people want to hear about it. They think because 6 months have passed, I should be over it and moving on with my life." "Grief does not work on a schedule," Jack said. "I lost my mother 4 years ago, and there are still days when something small will remind me of her and it hits me all over again." They continued working as the sky darkened, sharing stories of their lost loved ones and their lives before landing in Sweetwater. Jack learned that Sarah loved to read and missed having access to books, that she had a beautiful singing voice but had not sung since her husband died, and that she had always dreamed of having children but worried now that she never would. In turn, he told her about growing up on his father's ranch in Colorado, about learning to ride before he could walk and helping with the cattle drives every spring. He told her about watching the drought slowly strangle their land and his father's spirit, about the day they had finally lost everything, and his father had died of a broken heart less than a month later. By the time darkness forced them to stop working, they had cleared about a third of the dead garden and turned over the soil. Jack's back ached and his hands were blistered, but he felt more satisfied than he had in years. There was something deeply fulfilling about working land with purpose, about bringing dead soil back to life. "Come inside," Sarah said, leading him toward the small house. "I promised you dinner, and I keep my promises." The house was tiny, just 3 rooms, but it was clean and well kept. Sarah had made it comfortable with simple furnishings and handmade curtains. She served him a simple meal of beans and cornbread with fresh butter, apologizing for the plainness of it, but to Jack, who had been eating hardtack and jerky on the trail for weeks, it tasted like a feast. "This is wonderful," he said honestly. "You are a fine cook." Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you. It is nice to cook for someone besides myself again. The house feels less empty with another person in it." Jack understood exactly what she meant. They talked long into the evening, sitting at her small kitchen table while a single lamp cast a warm glow around the room. Jack found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone, about his dreams of someday having a ranch of his own, about the loneliness of drifting from place to place with no one to care if he lived or died. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own hopes for the future. When he finally rose to leave, well past midnight, Jack felt as though he had known Sarah for years rather than a single day. She walked him to the door, and in the moonlight, he could see that some of the grief had lifted from her face. "Thank you, Jack," she said softly. "Not just for helping with the garden, but for listening, for caring. It has been a long time since anyone has done that." "The pleasure was mine, Sarah," he replied, settling his hat on his head. "I will be back tomorrow evening if that is all right with you." "I will be waiting," she said, and Jack rode back to the ranch with those words warming him from the inside out. The days fell into a comfortable pattern. Jack would work the cattle from dawn until late afternoon, then ride to Sarah's homestead and spend his evenings working in the garden. Slowly but surely, the dead soil began to transform. They hauled in composted manure from the Morrison Ranch, mixed it with the turned earth, and carefully amended the soil until it began to show signs of life. Jack dug irrigation channels that would carry water from the creek more efficiently, and he spent an entire weekend helping Sarah repair the well pump, coaxing it back to life with some ingenuity and a lot of sweat. As the garden came back to life, so did something in Sarah. Jack watched the transformation with quiet wonder. The sadness that had weighed her down began to lift, replaced by hope and determination. She laughed more often, her smile coming easier each day. She began to sing again while they worked, her voice floating across the garden in the twilight, and Jack found himself working slower just to hear a few more notes before the song ended. For his part, Jack realized he was falling in love. It crept up on him slowly, like the dawn breaking over the Texas plains. He loved the way Sarah's nose crinkled when she concentrated, the way she pushed stray hairs back from her face with dirty hands, the way she looked at him when he made her laugh. He loved her strength and resilience, the way she refused to give up even when everything seemed stacked against her. He loved the quiet evenings they spent together, talking about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears they had never spoken aloud to anyone else. But Jack was careful not to push, not to make his feelings known. Sarah was still grieving her husband, still finding her footing in a world that had been turned upside down. The last thing she needed was a drifter cowboy declaring his love and complicating her life further. So Jack contented himself with friendship, with being the steady presence she needed, and tried not to think too hard about the way his heart raced when their hands accidentally touched while working in the garden. As summer gave way to early autumn, the garden began to show real promise. The soil, once gray and lifeless, had turned dark and rich. They planted cover crops that would protect and nourish the earth through the winter, preparing it for a spring planting that Jack prayed Sarah would live to see flourish. He had saved every penny of his wages from the Morrison Ranch, planning to help her dig a proper new well before next summer's heat arrived. One evening in late September, as they sat on Sarah's small porch watching the sun set over the garden, Sarah turned to Jack with a serious expression on her face. "Jack," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Jack's heart sank, certain she was about to tell him that she no longer needed his help, that he should stop coming around. "What is it?" "I have been thinking a lot lately about why you came into my life when you did," Sarah continued, her hands folded in her lap. "About what it means. When you first offered to help me with the garden, I thought you were either crazy or naive. I could not understand why a stranger would offer to spend his evenings doing backbreaking work for no pay, just to help someone he did not know." "Sarah, I told you why," Jack began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I know what you told me," she said, "and I believe you meant it, but I think there is more to it than that, and I think you know it too." Jack's mouth went dry. He looked away from her, focusing on the darkening horizon. "I do not know what you mean." "Jack Morrison, look at me," Sarah said, and the gentle command in her voice made him turn back to face her. "These past months working alongside you, talking with you, laughing with you, they have brought me back to life as surely as we brought that garden back to life. You have given me hope again, a reason to wake up in the morning and face the day. And I hope, that maybe you feel something similar." Jack's heart was pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. "Sarah, I did not want to say anything. You have been through so much. The last thing I wanted was to burden you with my feelings when you are still grieving." "I will always grieve Thomas," Sarah said softly. "He was my first love and he gave me 3 good years, but he is gone and I am still here. I am still alive and I want to keep living, not just surviving but truly living, and I cannot imagine doing that without you." Jack stood abruptly, unable to sit still any longer. He paced to the edge of the porch and back, running his hand through his hair. Sarah, I am just a drifter. I have nothing to offer you, no land, no money, no real prospects beyond my wages from the ranch. Sarah stood as well, moving to stand directly in front of him. She was small, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder, but the strength in her eyes made her seem 10 feet tall. You have offered me everything that matters, your kindness, your strength, your steadiness. You have shown up every single evening for 3 months, no matter how tired you were, no matter how hard the work. You have listened to me, laughed with me, helped me rebuild not just my garden but my whole life. If that is not something valuable, then I do not know what is. Jack looked down at her, seeing his own feelings reflected in her face. Slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, he raised his hand and cupped her cheek. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. I love you, Sarah, he whispered. I have loved you for weeks now, maybe from the first moment I saw you crying in that dead garden, but I am terrified. What if I cannot provide for you? What if I let you down? Life does not come with guarantees, Sarah replied, covering his hand with her own. I learned that when Thomas died. We can plan and work and hope, but tomorrow is never promised. All we have is today, this moment right now, and I do not want to waste another moment being afraid of what might happen. I love you too, Jack. I want to build a life with you, whatever that life may look like. Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her close as relief, and joy washed over him. Sarah wrapped her arms around his waist, her head resting against his chest, and they stood like that for a long time, listening to each other's heartbeats and watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Marry me, Jack said suddenly, the words spilling out before he could second-guess himself. I know it is fast, I know I should probably court you properly for a year or more, but Sarah, I do not want to wait. I want to wake up every morning knowing you are mine and I am yours. I want to finish that garden together and plant seeds for next spring. I want to build a life here in Sweetwater, make it our home. Say yes. Please say yes. Sarah pulled back just enough to look up at him, and in the lamplight spilling from the house, he could see tears glistening in her eyes. But she was smiling, a radiant smile that lit up her whole face. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Jack Morrison, I will marry you. Jack kissed her then, a gentle kiss that held all the love and promise he could not put into words. Sarah kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for the first time since his father had died, Jack felt like he was truly home. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Sweetwater. Bill Patterson stood as Jack's best man, and Martha Jenkins, the elderly woman who ran the boarding house where Jack had been staying, served as Sarah's matron of honor. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious about the drifter cowboy who had captured their young widow's heart. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that brought out the green in her eyes, with wildflowers in her hair that Jack had picked that morning. Jack wore his cleanest shirt and a new vest he had purchased with some of his saved wages, and he scrubbed himself so clean he practically glowed. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jack kissed Sarah in front of the whole town, not caring who saw or what they thought. This was his wife, his partner, his future, and he wanted everyone to know it. The town threw them a small reception at the church social hall, with food brought by various families and music provided by old Tom Wheeler and his fiddle. Jack and Sarah danced their first dance as husband and wife, spinning around the small floor while the townspeople clapped and cheered. Jack was not much of a dancer, but with Sarah in his arms, he felt like he could do anything. That night, Jack moved his few belongings into Sarah's small house, which was now their home. They lay together in the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly about their plans for the future. I have been thinking, Jack said, running his fingers through Sarah's loose hair. Bill Patterson mentioned that the property adjacent to yours might be coming up for sale soon. The owner is moving back east. If we could buy it, we would have enough land to run a small herd of cattle along with the garden. We could build a real ranch here, Sarah. Nothing as big as my father's place, but something that is ours. Sarah propped herself up on one elbow, her eyes shining with excitement. Could we really do that? Do you think we could afford it? Not right away, Jack admitted. It would take a few years of saving. But I have been putting aside most of my wages, and if you can get the garden producing next summer, we could sell the vegetables and add that income to our savings. If we are careful and work hard, I think we could make it happen. Then let us do it, Sarah said firmly. Let us build something together, something that is ours. We will make it work, Jack. I know we will. Jack pulled her back down against his chest, marveling at how his life had changed in just a few short months. He had ridden into Sweetwater with no plans beyond finding work for a season and then drifting on to the next town. Now he had a wife, a home, and a future that stretched before him filled with possibility. Winter came to Texas with surprising cold that year, and Jack and Sarah spent the long evenings planning every detail of their future. They pored over seed catalogs, deciding what to plant in the spring. They sketched plans for expanding the house, adding another bedroom for the children they hoped to have and a larger kitchen for Sarah. Jack continued working at the Morrison Ranch, saving every penny he could spare. Sarah took in sewing and mending from some of the town families, adding her earnings to their growing nest egg. The garden slept beneath its cover of winter crops, and Jack felt a deep satisfaction every time he looked at it. He and Sarah had taken something dead and brought it back to life. They had prepared the soil, enriched it, and made it ready for new growth. It seemed like a metaphor for their own lives, for the way they had taken the broken pieces of their pasts and built something new and hopeful together. On Christmas morning, Jack surprised Sarah with a gift he had been working on in secret. It was a wooden sign he had carved and painted with painstaking care, bearing the words Morrison Ranch in bold letters. Sarah cried when she saw it, happy tears that she brushed away with the back of her hand. "It is perfect," she whispered, throwing her arms around his neck. "But we do not have a ranch yet." "We will," Jack said confidently. "This is a promise, Sarah, a promise that we will build that ranch together no matter how long it takes." Sarah had a gift for him as well, a revelation that made Jack's heart nearly burst with joy. She was pregnant, due in late summer. Jack picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure happiness, and they spent the rest of Christmas Day dreaming about their child and making plans for the future. Spring arrived early that year, and Jack and Sarah threw themselves into preparing the garden for planting. The cover crops had done their job beautifully, and when they turned them under, the soil was rich and dark and full of life. They planted tomatoes and beans, squash and melons, carrots and potatoes, every inch of space carefully planned and utilized. Jack built trellises for the climbing plants and fashioned scarecrows to keep the birds away. Sarah tended the seedlings with the same care she would have given a baby, and Jack often found her in the garden at sunrise, her hands gentle on the young plants as she checked their progress. As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, Jack became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, take breaks from the garden work, drink plenty of water in the increasing heat. Sarah tolerated his hovering with good humor, though she often ignored his orders to rest and continued working alongside him until he physically escorted her back to the house. "I am pregnant, not dying," she told him one evening with exasperation as he tried to take a basket of tomatoes from her hands. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time, Jack Morrison. I am not going to break." "I know that," Jack said, taking the basket anyway. "But humor me, all right, I worry about you." Sarah's expression softened and she cupped his face in her hands. "I know you do, and I love you for it, but you need to trust that I know my own limits. I promise I will rest when I need to. But right now, I need to be doing this, working in our garden, building our future. It makes me feel alive and strong and capable. Please do not take that away from me." Jack understood then that his protectiveness, while well-intentioned, was the wrong approach. Sarah did not need him to shield her from everything. She needed him to support her, to work alongside her, to trust her judgment. So he backed off, letting her set her own pace, though he kept a watchful eye and was always ready to help when she needed it. The garden flourished beyond their wildest dreams that summer. The vegetables grew fat and healthy, nourished by the rich soil they had spent months preparing. Sarah began taking produce into town twice a week, selling it from a stall she set up in front of the general store. The townspeople, who remembered her failed garden from the previous year, were amazed by the transformation and eagerly bought everything she brought. Word spread, and soon people from neighboring farms were coming to town specifically to buy vegetables from Sarah Morrison. The money they earned was more than they had dared hope for. Jack continued working at the Patterson Ranch, and between his wages and Sarah's garden income, their savings grew steadily. Bill Patterson, who had become a good friend to them both, mentioned in June that the property next to theirs was definitely going up for sale in the fall. "The price is going to be fair," Bill told Jack one day as they mended fence together. "The owner wants to sell quick so he can move east before winter. If you have been saving like you said, you might just have enough for a down payment." Jack's heart raced with excitement. He did the calculations in his head, factoring in what they had saved and what Sarah's garden would likely earn through harvest season. It would be close, very close, but he thought they could do it. That evening he shared the news with Sarah as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, something that had become their nightly ritual. Sarah was 7 months pregnant now, her belly round beneath her loose dress, and she glowed with health and happiness. "You really think we can do it?" she asked, her hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked and moved. "I think we have to try," Jack replied. "This is our chance, Sarah, our chance to build something permanent, something we can pass down to our children." Sarah smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Then let us do it. Let us buy that land and start our ranch." Jack kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of sunshine and earth that always clung to her hair. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "At least 3 times, Sarah replied with a laugh. "But I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to tell you every day for the rest of our lives." In August, 3 weeks before the baby was due, disaster nearly struck. Jack was working at the Patterson Ranch when one of the hands came galloping up to him, shouting that there was a fire at his place. Jack's blood turned to ice. He abandoned his work and rode for home at a breakneck pace, his heart in his throat and prayers streaming from his lips. As he approached the homestead, he could see smoke rising into the sky, but to his relief, it was not the house burning. It was a small shed behind the house where they stored tools and supplies. Sarah was there, her dress soaked from the buckets of water she had been throwing on the flames, and several neighbors who had seen the smoke were helping to beat back the fire with wet blankets. Jack leaped from his horse and grabbed Sarah, pulling her away from the smoke and heat. "Are you all right? Is the baby all right?" "We are fine," Sarah gasped, coughing from the smoke. "It started in the shed, I do not know how. I was in the garden and I smelled smoke. By the time I got here, it was already well involved. I started throwing water and then Mr. Jenkins and his sons came to help. Between Jack and the neighbors, they managed to put out the fire before it spread to the house or the garden. The shed was a total loss along with most of their tools, but no one was hurt and the house was safe. As the neighbors drifted away and Jack surveyed the damage, he felt Sarah's hand slip into his. "It could have been so much worse," she said quietly. "If the wind had been blowing the other direction, we could have lost everything. The house, the garden, all our hard work." Jack pulled her close, mindful of her pregnant belly pressed between them. "But we did not lose it. We were lucky this time. But Sarah, you should not have been fighting that fire in your condition. What if something had happened? What if the baby had come early because of the stress?" "I had to do something," Sarah protested. "I could not just stand there and watch everything burn." "I know," Jack said, though his voice was tight with fear at what could have happened. "I know you could not. But promise me, if anything like this ever happens again, you will run to get help first instead of trying to handle it yourself." Sarah nodded against his chest. "I promise, you are right. I was not just thinking about myself. I am sorry I scared you." The fire turned out to be a blessing in disguise in one respect. When word spread through the community about what had happened, several of the neighboring ranchers showed up the next weekend with tools and materials to help Jack build a new, larger shed. They worked together in the tradition of barn raisings common to frontier communities, and by the end of the day, Jack and Sarah had a sturdy new storage building that was twice the size of the one they had lost. Bill Patterson pulled Jack aside as the work was wrapping up. "That is what community means out here, Jack. We look after our own. You and Sarah have proven yourselves to be good people, hard workers who do not ask for handouts but are not too proud to accept help when it is offered. Folks respect that. You are not a drifter anymore. You are one of us now." The words meant more to Jack than he could express. For years he had felt rootless, belonging nowhere and to no one. But here in Sweetwater, working this land with Sarah, he had found something he had never really had even on his father's ranch. He had found home. Their son was born on a hot September night with Martha Jenkins serving as midwife and Jack pacing anxiously in the kitchen, forbidden from the bedroom where Sarah labored. The hours seemed to stretch into eternity, and every cry or moan from the bedroom sent Jack's heart racing with fear. He had lost his mother, lost his father, and the thought of losing Sarah was more than he could bear. But when Martha finally opened the bedroom door with a smile on her face and told him he could come in, Jack found Sarah propped up in bed, tired but glowing with a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, tears of joy this time, and held out the baby for him to see. "We have a son," she whispered. "A healthy, perfect son." Jack approached the bed on shaking legs and looked down at his child for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a surprisingly full head of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. As Jack watched, the baby's eyes opened, unfocused but already searching, and Jack felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Can I hold him?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah carefully transferred the baby into his arms, showing him how to support the head. Jack held his son with the same reverence he might have held something holy, terrified he would break the tiny, perfect creature in his arms. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, and Jack felt tears streaming down his own face. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father. I promise I will do everything in my power to give you a good life, to protect you and teach you and love you. I will never let you wonder if you are wanted. You are so wanted, so loved already." Sarah was crying too, watching her husband bond with their son. "What should we name him?" she asked. They had discussed names for months but had never settled on one. Now, looking at his son's face, Jack knew exactly what felt right. "James," he said. "After your father, James Thomas Morrison." Sarah's face crumpled with emotion. "You want to give him my father's name." "Your father raised an incredible woman," Jack said, looking up from the baby to meet her eyes. "A woman strong enough to survive losing everything and brave enough to build a new life. I figure if we name our son after him, maybe some of that strength will rub off." "James Thomas Morrison," Sarah repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect. Welcome to the world, James." Jack stayed by Sarah's side all night, unwilling to leave them even though Martha shooed him out multiple times, insisting Sarah needed rest. In the morning, when the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, Jack sat in a chair beside the bed with James sleeping on his chest and Sarah sleeping beside him, and he felt a contentment so deep it almost hurt. This was everything he had never dared to dream of having. A wife he loved more than his own life, a healthy son, a home, and a future filled with possibility. The land adjacent to their property went up for sale 2 weeks after James was born, and Jack went to the owner with their savings and a proposal. They did not have enough money to buy the property outright, but they had enough for a substantial down payment. Jack negotiated a fair price and terms for monthly payments, backed by Bill Patterson, who vouched for Jack's character and work ethic. The deal was struck, and suddenly the Morrison Ranch was not just a painted sign, it was real. The property included 60 acres of decent grazing land, a small creek that ran year-round, and a dilapidated barn that would need significant repair. It was not much, but to Jack and Sarah, it was everything. They spent the fall making plans, deciding where to build new fencing, where to locate the cattle when they could finally afford to buy some, how to restore the barn. Sarah recovered quickly from childbirth, much to Jack's amazement. Within 3 weeks, she was back in the garden, though now she carried James in a sling while she worked. The baby seemed to thrive there, sleeping peacefully in the fresh air while Sarah harvested the last of the summer vegetables and began preparing the garden for winter. Jack continued working at the Morrison Ranch, but now every spare moment was devoted to their own land. He spent weekends repairing the barn, replacing rotted boards and shoring up the foundation. Bill Patterson, true to his word about community, often sent 1 or 2 of his hands to help Jack on Sundays, and the work progressed faster than Jack had dared hope. On Christmas Eve, Jack surprised Sarah by leading her out to the newly repaired barn. Waiting inside were 3 pregnant heifers, his Christmas gift to her. Sarah gasped in delight, immediately going to inspect the animals while Jack explained that Bill had given him a good price and terms to pay over time. "These 3 will give us 6 head by spring," Jack said, unable to contain his excitement. "And if we are careful with breeding and sales, we can grow the herd steadily. In 5 years, maybe less, we could have enough cattle to support ourselves without me needing to work at Patterson's ranch full-time." Sarah threw her arms around him, baby James squished between them and making a sound of protest that made them both laugh. "It is really happening, Jack. Everything we dreamed about, it is becoming real." "We still have a long way to go," Jack cautioned, though he was grinning. "Years of hard work ahead of us, but yes, Sarah, it is happening. We are building our ranch, building our life exactly the way we planned." That first winter with James was both exhausting and wonderful. The baby woke several times each night, and Jack took turns with Sarah walking the floor with their crying son, singing off-key lullabies and telling rambling stories about nothing in particular. Jack discovered he had a talent for soothing the baby that surprised them both. James would often settle immediately when Jack picked him up, his crying subsiding as he recognized his father's voice and touch. "He knows you," Sarah said one night, watching as Jack paced the small bedroom with James in his arms. "He feels safe with you." "The feeling is mutual," Jack replied, looking down at his son's face in the lamplight. "I never knew I could love someone so much so quickly. It terrifies me and thrills me at the same time." Spring came again, their second spring together, and the cycle began anew. The garden was planted, even larger than the previous year now that they had proven what the soil could do. The 3 heifers gave birth to healthy calves, 2 males and a female, and Jack felt like a cattle baron even though his herd consisted of just 6 animals. Sarah's garden produced bountifully again, and this time they were prepared. Jack built a proper stall in town for Sarah to sell from, with a sign bearing the Morrison Ranch name. Sarah expanded beyond just vegetables, adding preserves and pickles made from their produce. The townspeople could not get enough, and Sarah's little business thrived. James grew rapidly, becoming a fat, happy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. He was fascinated by everything, his eyes tracking the movements of birds and clouds, his hands reaching for whatever came within his grasp. Jack would take him out to see the cattle, holding him carefully while explaining about breeding and grazing as if the 6-month-old could understand every word. "You are going to spoil that boy," Sarah said one evening, watching from the porch as Jack walked through the pasture with James in his arms, pointing out various features of their land. "That is my right as a father," Jack replied with a grin. Besides, it is never too early to start teaching him about ranching. In July, Bill Patterson approached Jack with a proposition. He was getting older and wanted to start scaling back his responsibilities. He offered to make Jack his foreman, with a significant increase in pay and the understanding that Jack would eventually take over full management of the ranch when Bill retired. It was an opportunity Jack had never dreamed of, a level of responsibility and respect that took his breath away. He discussed it with Sarah that evening, laying out the pros and cons. The position would mean more money, which would allow them to pay off their land faster and expand their own herd more quickly. But it would also mean longer hours and more time away from home, at least for the next few years. "What do you want to do?" Sarah asked, though Jack could see in her eyes that she already knew his answer. "I want to take it," Jack admitted. "Not because I want to be away from you and James more, but because this is our chance to really secure our future. If I take this job, we could have our land paid off within 2 years instead of 5. We could build a proper house, expand the herd significantly. We could give James brothers and sisters without worrying whether we can afford to feed them all." "Then take it," Sarah said firmly. "We will make it work, Jack. We always do." Jack accepted the position, and true to Sarah's word, they made it work. The days were long and the work was hard, but they had a goal they were working toward together. Every dollar saved, every calf born, every basket of vegetables sold was a step closer to the future they had envisioned. That fall, they made the final payment on their land. Jack brought the deed home and spread it on the kitchen table, both of them staring at it with wonder. The land was theirs, truly theirs, with no debt hanging over their heads. They celebrated by taking James on a walk around the property, showing him the boundaries of his inheritance, the land his parents had worked so hard to secure for him. "Someday this will all be yours," Jack told his son, who was more interested in the grasshopper he had caught than in his father's words. "You will never know what it is like to lose your home, to drift from place to place with nothing to call your own. This land, this ranch, it will always be yours." Sarah slipped her hand into Jack's, squeezing gently. "We did it," she said softly. "We really did it." "We did," Jack agreed, pulling her close. "And we are just getting started." True to his word, Jack used their increased income and freed up cash flow to expand their herd. By the following spring, they had 12 head of cattle, enough to justify building more fencing and expanding their grazing area. Jack hired a local boy to help with the daily ranch chores, freeing up more of his time to focus on his foreman duties at the Morrison Ranch. Sarah was pregnant again, due in late summer. This time, Jack was less anxious, having been through the experience before. But he was no less attentive, making sure Sarah had everything she needed and doing more than his share of the household work as her pregnancy progressed. James was 2 years old now, a walking, talking bundle of energy who followed his father everywhere and showed an early fascination with the cattle and horses. Jack made him a small rope and taught him the basics of lasso throwing, laughing as the toddler's loops fell short time and again, but never lost enthusiasm. Their daughter was born on a cool September morning, coming into the world with a full head of red gold hair that surprised them both. Neither Jack nor Sarah had red hair, but Jack's grandmother had been a redhead, and the trait had apparently skipped a generation. "She is beautiful," Sarah whispered, holding the tiny girl while Jack sat beside her on the bed with James on his lap. "What should we name her?" "What about Eleanor?" Jack suggested. "After my mother, we could call her Ellie." Sarah smiled, touching the baby's soft hair. "Eleanor Grace Morrison. Hello, Ellie. Welcome to the family." James was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly, to hold her, to help with everything. Jack patiently taught his son how to be gentle, how to support the baby's head, how to rock her when she cried. It was clear from the start that James took his role as big brother seriously, and Jack felt his heart swell with pride watching his children together. Life on the Morrison Ranch fell into a rhythm over the next few years. The cattle herd grew steadily, and Jack's reputation as a cattleman and foreman grew with it. Bill Patterson, true to his word, began stepping back and allowing Jack to take on more management responsibilities. The Patterson Ranch thrived under Jack's leadership. And Bill never missed an opportunity to tell people that Jack Morrison was the best decision he had ever made. Sarah's garden continued to be productive, though she scaled back her market presence somewhat to focus more on the children. She still sold preserves and pickles, but now she also took an occasional sewing work and helped Martha Jenkins at the boarding house during busy seasons. James grew into a capable, serious child who loved the ranch and the cattle with a passion that rivaled his father's. By the age of 5, he was helping with real ranch work, feeding the chickens Sarah had added to their homestead, collecting eggs, and even helping to move the cattle from one pasture to another under his father's watchful eye. Ellie was a bright, happy child with a fearless streak that kept both her parents on their toes. She climbed everything, explored constantly, and showed an early love for horses that surprised no one. Jack taught her to ride when she was barely 4 years old, sitting her on the gentlest mare in their small remuda and walking beside her for hours until she had the hang of it. In the spring of 1884, 6 years after Jack had first ridden into Sweetwater, Bill Patterson announced his retirement. He was selling the ranch to a consortium of buyers, but he made sure Jack was taken care of in the sale. Jack received a substantial bonus for his years of service and recommendations that ensured he could find work anywhere in Texas if he needed it. But Jack did not need other work. The Morrison Ranch was finally large enough and productive enough to support them full-time. They had 40 head of cattle now, a proper barn, an expanded house with 4 bedrooms and a real kitchen, a chicken coop, a pig pen, and a garden that was the envy of the county. They had 2 hired hands who helped with the daily work, and Sarah had a woman from town who came twice a week to help with cleaning and cooking. Jack stood on the porch of their home one evening, watching the sun set over their land, and marveled at how far they had come. The garden that he and Sarah had brought back from death all those years ago was flourishing, bigger and more productive than ever. Beyond it, their cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures they had fenced and irrigated. In the house behind him, he could hear Sarah singing to the children, her voice the same beautiful sound that had captivated him from the beginning. "Thank you," he whispered to whatever force had guided him to Sweetwater that hot July day so many years ago. "Thank you for giving me this life, this family, this home." Sarah joined him on the porch, slipping her arm around his waist. The years had been kind to her, adding laugh lines around her eyes and a few silver threads in her dark hair, but to Jack, she was more beautiful than ever. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "About the day I met you," Jack replied. "About how you were crying over a dead garden and I had no idea that helping you would change my entire life." Sarah smiled, turning to face him. "I was so lost that day. So hopeless. I thought my life was over, that I had nothing left to live for. And then you appeared, this stranger with kind eyes who offered to help for no reason except that you could. You gave me hope again, Jack. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Jack corrected, cupping her face in his hands. "I was drifting, lost, broken. You gave me a purpose, a reason to stay in one place. You gave me a home and a family. You gave me love. We built this life together, Sarah, every bit of it." "I love you," Sarah whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "I love you so much, Jack Morrison." "I love you too," Jack replied, kissing her softly, "now and always." James appeared in the doorway, Ellie on his heels. "Papa, Mama, come see." Ellie drew a picture of the ranch. Jack and Sarah laughed, allowing their children to pull them inside to admire Ellie's crayon drawing that bore little resemblance to reality, but captured something essential nonetheless. The 4 of them sat around the kitchen table, James proudly pointing out various features of Ellie's artwork, and Jack thought about how this was what he had been searching for all those years he had drifted from town to town. Not just land or money or success, though they had achieved all of those things. What he had been searching for was this feeling, this sense of belonging, of being exactly where he was supposed to be with exactly the people he was supposed to be with. He had found it in a dead garden in Sweetwater, Texas, brought back to life with hard work, hope, and love. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters when they worried about the cattle, dry summers when they had to carefully manage water resources, and illnesses that swept through the community and left them terrified for their children's safety. But through it all, Jack and Sarah faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. They added 2 more children to their family, another son they named William after Bill Patterson, who had become like a father to Jack, and a second daughter they named Caroline. The house expanded again to accommodate the growing family, and the Morrison Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the county. James grew into a young man who was the spitting image of his father, tall and broad-shouldered with the same quiet strength that had first attracted Sarah to Jack. He took to ranching naturally, and by the time he was 16, he was handling responsibilities that would have challenged men twice his age. Jack watched his son with pride, knowing that the Morrison Ranch would be in good hands when he eventually passed it on. Ellie, true to her fearless nature, became one of the best riders in the county. She could rope and brand with the best of the ranch hands, and she had a way with horses that bordered on magical. Jack indulged her more than he probably should have, but how could he not when she looked at him with those eyes so like her mother's and asked to go on cattle drives or help break in the new horses? William was quieter than his older siblings, more thoughtful and studious. He loved to read and often talked about becoming a lawyer or a teacher. Jack supported this, even though part of him had hoped all his sons would want to run the ranch. Sarah reminded him gently that they had raised their children to think for themselves, to find their own paths, and they needed to be proud of whatever choices their children made. Caroline was still young, only 6 years old, but she already showed signs of inheriting her mother's talent for growing things. She spent hours in the garden with Sarah, learning the names of plants and how to tend them, her small hands gentle on the seedlings. One evening in the fall of 1891, Jack and Sarah celebrated their 13th wedding anniversary with a rare night alone. The children were staying with Martha Jenkins in town, and Jack and Sarah sat on their porch watching the stars come out, just as they had done countless times before. "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked suddenly. "Marrying me so quickly, tying your life to a drifter with nothing but dreams and determination," Sarah laughed, the sound warm and rich in the darkness. "Not for a single moment. You gave me back my life, Jack. You gave me love and children and a home. You gave me the Morrison Ranch. How could I ever regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Jack said, taking her hand, "that this life is what you wanted." "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. "I am content, Jack. I am fulfilled. I wake up every morning grateful for another day with you and our children. This life we built together, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." Jack pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. The cattle lowing in the distance, the crickets singing their endless song, the soft rustle of wind through the grass. These were the sounds of home, of a life well lived, of dreams achieved through hard work and love. "Do you remember that first evening I came to help you with the garden?" Jack asked. "You were so skeptical, so certain I would not come back after the first night." Sarah laughed again. "I thought you were crazy. Who offers to spend their evenings doing back-breaking work for a stranger, but you kept coming back night after night, week after week. You showed me that there were still good people in the world, people who help just because they can." "I fell in love with you that first night," Jack admitted. "Watching you in the garden, seeing your determination to rebuild even when everything seemed hopeless. I knew then that you were special, that if I let you go, I would regret it for the rest of my life." "I fell in love with you too," Sarah said softly. "Maybe not that first night, but soon after. You made me feel safe and valued. You listened when I talked about Thomas without judgment or jealousy. You gave me time to heal while showing me that I could love again. You were exactly what I needed, exactly when I needed it." They made love that night with the tenderness that comes from years of knowing each other's bodies and hearts. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Jack thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a dead garden to a thriving ranch, from strangers to soulmates, from grief and loss to joy and abundance. "I would do it all again," he whispered into Sarah's hair. "Every moment, every hardship, every triumph. I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." "Me too," Sarah murmured, already half asleep. "Me too, my love." The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both big and small. James fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher and married at 21. Bringing his bride to live on the Morrison Ranch in a small house, Jack helped him build on the far corner of their property. Within a year, Jack and Sarah were grandparents to a squalling baby boy who had his grandmother's green eyes and his grandfather's dark hair. Ellie, to no one's surprise, refused several marriage proposals from local boys, declaring that she had no intention of settling down until she had seen more of the world. Jack worried about her traveling alone, but Sarah supported their daughter's independence, and eventually, Ellie set off for Denver with Martha Jenkins' nephew as an escort, promising to write often. William did indeed pursue education, earning a scholarship to study law in Austin. Jack was immensely proud, though he missed his quiet, thoughtful son. William came home for summers and holidays, regaling the family with stories of his studies and his life in the city. Caroline continued to flourish in the garden, and by the time she was 12, she was managing the entire vegetable operation herself with minimal supervision from Sarah. She had expanded beyond just vegetables, adding a flower garden that attracted customers from all over the county. She dried the flowers and made them into arrangements and potpourri that sold as quickly as she could make them. In the spring of 1896, Jack turned 45 years old. He was no longer the young drifter who had ridden into Sweetwater with nothing but the clothes on his back and a good horse. His hair was graying at the temples, his face was weathered by years in the sun, and his hands bore the calluses and scars of a lifetime of hard work. But he was content in a way he had never imagined possible. The Morrison Ranch now encompassed over 200 acres, with a herd of more than 100 head of cattle. They had 6 full-time ranch hands, a foreman who handled the day-to-day operations, and a reputation that extended throughout Texas. Jack was frequently asked to speak at cattlemen's associations and to consult on ranch management for other operations. But for all their success and prosperity, Jack's favorite times were still the quiet evenings on the porch with Sarah, watching the sunset over the land they had built together. They had been married 18 years now, and Jack loved her more with each passing day. She was his partner in every sense of the word, and he could not imagine navigating life without her by his side. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, James and his wife had given them 3 more by now, Sarah turned to Jack with a serious expression. "I want to plant something special in the garden next spring," she said. "Something to commemorate everything this land has meant to us." "What did you have in mind?" Jack asked. "A tree," Sarah replied. "An oak tree right in the center of the original garden plot. It will grow tall and strong, providing shade for generations to come. And every time our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren see it, they will remember where we started. They will remember that what was once dead can be brought back to life with care and love and hard work." Jack felt tears prick his eyes at the beauty of the idea. "That is perfect, Sarah. Absolutely perfect." They planted the oak tree the following spring in a ceremony that included all their children, their grandchildren, and many of the townspeople who had watched the Morrison Ranch grow from a dead garden into a thriving operation. Sarah spoke about the importance of roots, both literal and figurative, and about how the tree would stand as a testament to what could be achieved when people refused to give up hope. Jack added soil from the original garden plot to the whole before they planted the tree, mixing the earth that had once been dead with the rich, living soil it had become. As they covered the roots and watered the young sapling, Jack felt a profound sense of completion, as if this act was the final piece of a puzzle he had been assembling for nearly 2 decades. The oak tree thrived, growing stronger with each passing season. Caroline tended it faithfully, making sure it had enough water during the hot summers and protecting it from grazing cattle. Within 5 years, it was taller than Jack, its branches spreading wide to provide the shade Sarah had envisioned. Life continued its rhythm of seasons and cycles. Ellie returned from Denver with tales of adventure and a husband she had met in Colorado, a rancher's son who reminded Jack very much of himself at that age. They settled in Colorado, but they visited often, and their children spent summers at the Morrison Ranch learning about ranching from their grandfather. William graduated from law school and opened a practice in San Antonio, but he never forgot his roots. He handled all the legal affairs for the Morrison Ranch and frequently brought his own family to visit. His children were city kids, uncomfortable around cattle and horses at first, but Jack took pleasure in teaching them about ranch life, just as he had taught his own children. James took over more and more of the ranch operations as Jack grew older, proving himself to be every bit the cattleman his father was. Jack stepped back gradually, taking on more of an advisory role while still remaining active in the business. He enjoyed having more time to spend with Sarah and their growing number of grandchildren, and he found satisfaction in watching the next generation take the reins. Caroline married a local boy when she was 20, a quiet young man who worked in the bank but loved the garden as much as she did. They built a house in town, but spent their days working the Morrison Ranch garden together, expanding it into a full-fledged commercial operation that supplied vegetables and flowers throughout the region. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Jack and Sarah renewed their vows in the small church where they had first married. The church was packed with family and friends, and Jack felt a sense of profound gratitude as he looked at Sarah across from him, still beautiful, still strong, still the woman who had changed his life all those years ago. 25 years ago, Jack said in his vows, his voice strong despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. I rode into Sweetwater with no plans beyond finding work for a season. I saw you crying over a dead garden and something in me knew that I was supposed to stop, supposed to help. I had no idea that decision would lead to this, to a life richer and fuller than anything I had ever dreamed. You are my heart, Sarah Morrison. You are my home. And I thank God every day for that dead garden that brought us together. Sarah was crying, happy tears that she made no effort to hide. You saw me at my lowest point, she said, her voice shaking slightly. And instead of turning away, you offered help. You offered hope. You showed me that life could be beautiful again, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil. You plowed new earth and planted seeds for next year, both literally and figuratively, and together we have grown something more wonderful than I ever imagined possible. I love you, Jack Morrison. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. There was not a dry eye in the church, as Jack and Sarah sealed their renewed vows with a kiss. The celebration afterward lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed the entire town. Jack danced with Sarah, with his daughters-in-law, and with each of his granddaughters, his heart full to bursting with love and gratitude. As the years passed, Jack and Sarah transitioned into the role of elder statesmen of the ranch, offering guidance and wisdom while allowing the younger generation to run things. Jack's hair turned completely white, and he moved a bit slower than he used to, but his mind remained sharp and his love for the land never dimmed. Sarah developed arthritis in her hands, which made garden work difficult, but she still spent hours in the garden that Caroline now managed, offering advice and simply enjoying the peace of being surrounded by growing things. The oak tree they had planted had become massive, its branches spreading to provide shade over a significant portion of the original garden area. Grandchildren played beneath it, and family gatherings were often held in its shade. On Jack's 60th birthday, the family threw a huge celebration at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren were there, along with what seemed like half the county. Jack stood beneath the oak tree and looked around at the faces of the people he loved, at the land he had worked for over 30 years, and he felt a peace so deep it almost hurt. James approached him with a large wrapped package. "Dad, we all got together and made you something. We wanted you to have it for your birthday." Jack unwrapped the package to find a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign, much like the one he had made for Sarah all those years ago on their first Christmas together. But this one was different. It read Morrison Ranch ESD. 1878, built on faith, hope, and love. "Turn it over," Ellie urged, bouncing on her toes with excitement despite being a grown woman with children of her own. Jack turned the sign over and found the other side carved with an intricate scene of a cowboy and a woman working in a garden together. The details so fine he could make out individual plants and tools. Beneath the carving were the words, "From death comes life, from despair comes hope, from strangers comes love." Jack could not speak around the lump in his throat. He pulled each of his children into a fierce hug, then turned to Sarah, who was crying openly. "It is perfect," he managed to say finally. "Thank you all. This means more to me than you can possibly know." The sign was installed at the entrance to the Morrison Ranch the following week, where it would greet visitors for generations to come. Jack rode out to look at it often, marveling at how a simple act of kindness had blossomed into this legacy. As Jack entered his 7th decade, his health began to decline. Nothing serious, just the natural slowdown that came with age, but it reminded him that his time was limited. He made sure to spend quality time with each of his children and grandchildren, sharing stories of the past and imparting whatever wisdom he had accumulated over the years. His favorite times were still with Sarah, though. They would sit on the porch for hours, holding hands and watching the ranch bustle with activity. Sometimes they talked, reminiscing about the early days and marveling at how far they had come. Other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, communicating in the way that only couples who have spent decades together can, with looks and touches that spoke volumes. "You ever think about that first day?" Sarah asked one evening as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "The day you found me crying in the garden, all the time," Jack replied, squeezing her hand gently. His hands were gnarled with arthritis now, but his grip was still strong. "I think about how close I came to just riding past, minding my own business. What would have happened if I had? Would you have lost the house? Where would you have gone?" "I do not know," Sarah admitted. "I was pretty close to giving up entirely. If you had not stopped, had not offered hope, I might have just walked away from everything. But you did stop. You saw someone in pain and you chose to help. That decision changed both our lives." "It was the best decision I ever made," Jack said firmly. "Stopping to help you, asking you to marry me, building this ranch together. Every good thing in my life stems from that moment in the garden." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, a position they had sat in thousands of times over the years. "We built something beautiful, Jack. Not just the ranch, but our life together, our family, our love. It is a legacy that will last long after we are gone." Jack kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her. Even after all these years, she still smelled like sunshine and earth, like the garden that had brought them together. "I love you, Sarah Morrison. I have loved you for over 30 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left and beyond." "And I love you," Sarah whispered, "always and forever." They sat like that until the stars came out. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. The ranch hummed with activity around them, their children and grandchildren living lives full of promise and potential. All of it rooted in the dead garden that had bloomed again through love and determination. Jack lived to see his 72nd birthday, still sharp and engaged despite his failing body. He died peacefully in his sleep one spring night with Sarah beside him, just as he had wished. The whole county turned out for his funeral, testament to the impact he had made on the community over his decades in Sweetwater. Sarah grieved, as anyone would after losing their partner of over 40 years, but she did not break. She was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, supported by the community, and sustained by the knowledge that she and Jack had lived a full and beautiful life together. She continued living on the ranch, tending to the garden when her arthritis allowed and spending time with her expanding family. She lived another 8 years, dying at the age of 78. Her last words were to Caroline, who sat beside her bed holding her hand. "Tell them," Sarah whispered, "tell all of them that love is the most important thing, not money, not success, not even the land itself. Love is what matters. Love is what lasts." Sarah was buried beside Jack beneath the oak tree they had planted together all those years ago. The tree had grown massive and strong, its roots deep in the soil that had once been dead but had been brought back to life through care and determination. At the funeral, James stood beneath those spreading branches and told the story of how his parents had met, of the cowboy who had seen a woman crying over a dead garden and had chosen to help. "My father plowed new soil and planted seeds for next year," James said, his voice strong despite his tears. "He did that literally, bringing my mother's garden back to life, but he also did it metaphorically, giving both of them a future when neither had much hope. They planted seeds of love and family and community, and we are all here today because of the life they built together. This ranch, this family, this legacy, it all started with a simple act of kindness in a dead garden. And it will continue for generations to come because the roots they planted run deep." The Morrison Ranch continued to thrive under James' leadership and eventually under his children's leadership. The garden remained productive, managed by Caroline's children and then her grandchildren. The oak tree grew larger with each passing year, becoming a landmark visible for miles around. Couples were married in its shade, children played beneath its branches, and family gatherings were held there every year on the anniversary of Jack and Sarah's first meeting. The story of the cowboy and the dead garden became family legend, passed down from generation to generation. Great-grandchildren who never met Jack and Sarah knew their story, knew about the love that had bloomed in unlikely circumstances, about the determination that had turned dead soil into thriving land. The carved sign at the entrance to the ranch stood for over 100 years before finally being replaced, and the original was preserved in the family home as a precious heirloom. The words "from death comes life, from despair comes hope, from strangers comes love" became a family motto, a reminder of where they had come from and the values that had built their legacy. Decades after Jack and Sarah were gone, a young man from the family, a great-great-grandson named Jack Morrison Roman IV, stood in the garden beneath the ancient oak tree. He had just graduated from agricultural college and was preparing to take his place working the ranch and managing the commercial garden operation. As he stood there, running his hands through the rich, dark soil, he thought about his ancestors and the story he had heard countless times growing up. A cowboy had seen a woman crying over a dead garden. Instead of riding past, he had stopped. He had helped. He had plowed new soil and planted seeds for next year, both in the garden and in their lives. From that simple act of kindness had grown this ranch, this family, this legacy that had lasted over a century and would continue for centuries more. Jack Roman IV knelt down and picked up a handful of soil, letting it run through his fingers. This was the same soil his great-great-grandfather had worked all those years ago, enriched by generations of care and labor. This was living soil, productive soil, soil that could sustain and nourish. But it had started as dead soil, gray and lifeless, brought back through determination and love. "Thank you," he whispered to ancestors he had never met but felt connected to nonetheless. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for showing us that anything dead can be brought back to life if we care enough to do the work. Thank you for planting seeds that grew into all of this. A breeze rustled through the oak tree's leaves, and Jack Roman IV chose to take it as an answer, a benediction from the past. He stood up, brushed the soil from his hands, and walked toward the house where his family was gathering for Sunday dinner. The ranch stretched around him in all directions, alive and thriving, a testament to what could be built when strangers became lovers, when death transformed into life, when despair bloomed into hope. The Morrison Ranch stood as proof that the smallest acts of kindness could have impacts that echoed through generations. That a cowboy stopping to help a crying woman could change not just 2 lives, but hundreds of lives over the course of a century. That love planted in dead soil could grow into something beautiful and enduring that would outlast them all. And in the garden, beneath the spreading branches of the oak tree, the soil remained dark and rich and full of life, ready for another season, another planting, another harvest. Just as Jack had promised Sarah all those years ago, he had plowed new soil and planted seeds for next year. Those seeds had grown into a legacy of love that would never die, rooted deep in the Texas earth and in the hearts of everyone who came after them. The story of the cowboy and the dead garden was not just history. It was living memory, a reminder that love could bloom anywhere, that hope could be found even in the darkest moments, and that kindness offered to a stranger could change the world in ways both big and small. It was the foundation upon which the Morrison Ranch was built, and it would continue to be told and retold for as long as the ranch stood and the oak tree grew. From death came life. From despair came hope. From strangers came love. And from that love came everything else, a legacy that would endure forever, growing and flourishing like the garden itself, season after season, year after year, generation after generation, world without end.